Greetings. You've stumbled upon Esoteric Babble. I'm Charles. Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing some thoughts on the word gnosis. We can point out, first of all, that the word comes from a Greek word, gignosko, which just means to know. And if you think about the GNO part of that, that is very similar to our KNO in the word to know, KNOW, and actually goes back to a Proto-Indo-European root of gno, meaning to know. Not too surprising. The word also we see in Pali, and you see it in the phrase jnana karani, chaku karani, jnanu karani, spoken of the Eightfold Path, meaning it produces insight and knowledge. Also, in the same sort of formula, in the same discussion, the Buddha says that the Eightfold Path will lead to abhinya, or technically in Pali, it'd be abhinaya, but abhinya, which is kind of a special sort of knowledge. Api, meaning to go beyond. So we can think about this in that sense, but I think it's important, and I think you see it in the Pali there, that the Buddha is referring to kind of a special kind of knowledge. And that's really what gnosis has come to mean. It's a form of knowledge that you might say is intuitive knowledge. As a matter of fact, you can read in Pali the chaku jnana, which is like the eye of intuition. And I think it's important to have a word like this set aside to contrast with what we normally consider to be knowledge. Knowledge is typically of some external object, of some field of study, of some body of knowledge. And it's amazing, it is necessary. Knowledge of the material world has made the physical life of people and animals much better. Now, of course, it can lead to ruin as well. I mean, knowledge is not necessarily only a good, because like any tool, it can be used in various ways. But knowledge, it is not controversial to say that knowledge has produced huge strides in eliminating suffering, especially when you think about disease, surgery, and just medicine in general. And for things like what we're doing right now, communication, recording, all sorts of things. I mean, the arts have benefited from external knowledge as well. But I do think it's worth pointing out that while we can advance our knowledge and increase our material condition for the better, or make our material condition better, there is another way to sort of go regarding, how should we say, regarding probing what is, and that is to go internally through introspection. And this sort of knowledge is the kind of knowledge that is not does not really rely on external validation typically. So for instance, you might drink a hot cup of coffee. It might even be too hot. If someone were to come along and say, no, it's not too hot. If something is scaldingly hot, it's the sort of thing that goes beyond the logic part of the brain. We know something scalding hot or very cold or fragrant or pleasant or painful without needing to reflect upon it. And I think gnosis is the endeavor to come to that knowledge. As a matter of fact, something that we could point out about the form of the word, these SIS words in Greek often have to do with, or probably always have to do with, the idea of a process. You can think of a metamorphosis, which is like a changing of states or shapes. Osmosis, kind of this seepage that occurs. Gnosis, this knowing, this ongoing process. There's even in ancient Greek, their word for nature is physis, which is interesting because it has to do with growth, but it's this process. It's a way of looking at the world and saying that it's not a completed object. It's something that's sort of dynamic. So I think that's worth pointing out about the word gnosis. And I think in general, this is what the pursuit of ageless wisdom or those on the esoteric path are after. It's this intuitive form of knowing. And I would say that it is at least as important to gain this knowledge as it is for the other types of knowledge, which, by the way, I am not in any way taking away how important other knowledge is. What I'm trying to say is that gnosis, intuitive knowledge, or the pursuit of ageless wisdom, etc., is that important, if not more. And it's important because it has to do with making our lives easier. The pursuit of this gnosis is to help us live our life as fully as possible. And also, one thing about our life that you see in all sorts of, in self-help, philosophical discourse, in religious and spiritual texts, we could be as healthy as possible. But people that we know and love and care about, maybe need, are going to die. And we, at some point, will die. Unless you are some sort of like science fiction fantasist who believes that death will someday be conquered. Until that point happens, we have to live with the fact that people will pass on. And this pursuit, this gnosis, is something that can help us with that, help us understand what that is, help us integrate that experience and live with it in a way that hopefully isn't as devastating, debilitating. So those are some main points about gnosis. I think there's a lot more to say. I would say one thing, like if you're interested in kind of like science fiction and thinking about alien races, which to me must exist, I don't think it's very difficult to think that an advanced civilization would at some point decide to turn inward. And it's also possible to think that some advanced civilizations, because of the situation they find themselves in, perhaps they're like fish on a complete water world, that maybe their only avenue is to go inward with their knowledge, and not, maybe they don't really have a means of developing technology the way people did, or the way that humans have. And maybe this is one answer to the Fermi paradox of why we don't see aliens. Maybe on some level, as people become more intelligent, as they evolve more, maybe become super sentient compared to human beings, maybe the path leads inward. And that is where they find the most, that's what they consider to be worthy of their time and effort. So that is basically what we have to say about gnosis today. There is a lot more to be said. And as always, this isn't always about saying. The saying, it points us in the right direction. But meditation, contemplation, these are things that help us develop gnosis. And I haven't really touched on that, and that's really to uncover gnosis, to come into contact with gnosis. We have to develop means of doing so, and these means are out there. They're not secretive at this point. One method of going about getting this gnosis is sometimes described as the apophatic way, or the via negativa. That is, in order to, in normal ways of building knowledge, we kind of compound our knowledge. We put knowledge together with other knowledge, and we're able to learn things that way. But about the sort of ultimate reality, which lies beyond language, we actually have to reverse the process. And we want to think less and less. Every time we are trying to describe ultimate reality, we are limiting it. And there are many people in who represent this. Pseudo Dionysius, Meister Eckhart, even Thomas Aquinas had an enlightening experience. Taoism certainly speaks of this. Buddhism, I think, has, from its inception, been very suspicious of language. And this is very clearly felt in Zen Buddhism. And in the very first koan to the Mumonkan collection, that's the Japanese name, Wu Manguan, maybe in Chinese, forgive my pronunciation. It's kind of the famous koan where an adept asks Xiaozhou, I believe, Xiaozhou, does even a dog have the Buddha nature? And Xiaozhou says, no. But the no is not taken as a response to the question. It's taken as a response to the questioning. And this is really important. So right there in the beginning, this is the key to unlocking this sort of practice, is to negate these sorts of questions. We have to go the other way. As a matter of fact, you can use that. Now, people sometimes use just the Japanese word mu, but it really just means no. And I believe that's how Cleary translated it. But you can use that word no whenever these sorts of questions arise. Again, in other realms, if you're a chemist or a physicist or a doctor or an architect, or fill in the blank, yes, we are going to proceed in a different fashion. But when we are trying to settle the mind and come into contact with this unnameable, rootless root of all things, we have to try to go beyond language. We have to realize that at best it's going to be a pointer, and it's more than likely going to distort our perception. So we can use this no. And if you want to tie it to gnosis, since it sounds the same, we could make it a no-sis, like a negative sis, keeping in mind that the SIS is this process. We can have a process of know, of knowing, not KNOW, but NO-ing thoughts as they arise. And hopefully by that process, we're able to come to a deeper understanding and just let the mind sort of reveal itself. Hopefully this has been somewhat helpful. Of course, you can leave your comments about any mistakes that I've made. I don't really script this at all, which is probably not hard to believe. And there are many topics here that we will discuss further, especially this whole via negativa. And peace to all.